let's bring on the presentation. Let's start our session for today. Okay. Okay, while this is up, I have to, like every time, I have to mention our standard disclaimer. And the disclaimer before we actually begin this thing is that this is a webinar. This is a purely educational thing. We don't sell anything. We don't recommend any product. We don't discuss any product. And whatever we do, this is just a free service. It's like our little contribution, and it's a platform where we exchange information. Other than that, as you can see, it's all on your screen in terms of our legal status and otherwise. So let's enjoy this webinar as we move along. So let's move forward. Okay. Now, what has happened in all the budgets, including the last few years, there has been a general trend which we've seen. And the general trend has always been, let me present something socialistic, something that makes sense from an India point of view. 2 years back, there was a very interesting document that came, and that document basically said Viksit Bharat 2047. So it was like a vision paper for the government that what are the things that we are going to do by the time it is 2047. And then, if you notice, each budget is in line with the same thing. In the same fashion, this time's overall theme is Yuva Shakti, right? So we will very briefly, we will just understand the general outline of the budget, and then we will basically move into the nitty-gritties and where we find opportunities. Okay, so let's just have a basic, understanding of where we find that our policymakers are taking us. Okay, so very simple. In terms of Yuva Shakti, they basically said that this year the focus is going to be on the youth of the country, which means for the youth, we want to set up a long-term vision for them. And that vision is in the form of, let's build skills for the young people. Let's create universities and institutions for them. Let's also make committees. And these committees will then further give us recommendations on what should be done and what action the government should undertake for the benefit of this particular section. Of course, we are the largest and the youngest demographic, I beg your pardon, demographic of the world, and which is why the kind of youth power that we have, the number of people, like about more than 60% of our population is below the age of 35 or perhaps more. So all of this, how are we going to make a difference in their lives? Other than that, there were a few things that we spoke about that were mentioned in the budget about scaling up of industries, some very interesting things there. Usual, thrust on infrastructure, which we've been witnessing. And I think most parts of India are witnessing, and even if you're visiting India, you're seeing that the roads are very different, the infrastructure is very different, and we are moving at a very, very phenomenal sort of pace. So, like I mentioned, skills, institutions, and committees is what the government thinks that they will set up for the younger generation. And let's move to three very important announcements you see that the government really did here. And one of the announcements was semiconductors. Now, why this semiconductor becomes very important is from a simple point of view. And for that, let me just take you 5 years back, right? When we had COVID, semiconductors typically are required the maximum in the manufacture of electronics, electronic components, mobile phones, auto parts, etc. So the highest demand was from the automobile industry. Now, what happened is that because of COVID and because there were all sorts of assumptions that this is going to go on for a very, very long time. We are not going to come out of this. Vaccinations will take a long time. Do you recall all the conversations that were playing around there? And life has changed dramatically and completely. And everybody's life is going to become work from home and at least 50%, 60%. I mean, that was all the conversation and the information flow at that point of time. So what automakers thought is that we are not going to require so many chips. So they kind of downplayed or downgraded the number of orders. But then everybody got hit by a surprise, because within about a year's time, and after the second wave got over in 21, by the time it was 22, we were all, not even 22, towards the end of 21, everything was back to normal. Everything was moving with jet speed, and not only jet speed, everybody was traveling, buying cars, buying luxuries with a vengeance. So what happened there is people realized, oh, life is so uncertain. Suddenly, some virus can come and change our lives. So may as well live our lives before the virus decides to change the course of our lives. And as a result of which, what suddenly happened is there was a massive spike in demand for everything. And semiconductor is pretty much a piece of technology that really runs everything. So what the government has now said is that we want to become a self-sufficient economy in terms of semiconductors. So much so that we have a semiconductor mission. Now, what that directly translates into an opportunity for us is the companies that are there who are manufacturing semiconductors, the industries that are using semiconductors, and the consumers who are interested in buying the products that have semiconductors. So can you imagine? And semiconductor is somewhere linked with electronic components also. Like both these things together have been given their, you know, their little inclination of the government that we want to do this. See, the government now has a very different stance. We don't make very boisterous statements. We don't hear, statements that are, kind of, earth moving speeches and that kind of stuff. We just hear a very simple statement. This is what we want to do. Now we have to understand and then read the fine print and figure out what that really means. So we are really being extremely modest about the kind of opportunities we are presented with, and it's up to us to make the best use of it. Of course, the third area was rare earth. We want to also have a lot of processing capability on rare earth, but rare earth will become a opportunity in a slightly different way at a slightly later time. But right now, what's in front of us is semiconductors and electronics, and obviously this industry that manufactures this for us. Okay. What is also happening is sports goods. Now, we don't see a lot of companies in that space, but this is a very good boost to the industry. I mean, the people who actually manufacture right now, we don't have a very, very mega scale sports manufacturing sort of a company, but there are lots of companies who are small to medium enterprises. That's a great thing there. Textile parks, basically, come on, it's very straightforward. There are a lot of companies in this space will now be able to export their goods, and combine that incidentally with what happened in this week where India and USA seem to have reached a trade arrangement. After the big arrangement that we had with the European Union, now it seems we are going to be back in business with America also, and which means all the adverse tariff and embargoes go away and business moves as usual. The immediate beneficiary of that is textile companies. And then if we also have the government is pushing textiles, again, that becomes a big, big sort of a move for us. Okay, before we actually move into infrastructure, there's something that I want to speak about, and we've always spoken about this. That what are the three things that really move the stock market? Right now, I know we are standing in February of 26, and we are on the back of almost a year and a half of a very sideways sort of a market. We've not really made much, but thankfully we've not lost much as well. There are three things which I've always said which move the markets, right? So one is profitability of the companies. What is the company doing? Irrespective of the environment, how is the company doing? If there are profits, obviously the share price moves up. And if the share price moves up, then obviously the company, if included in your mutual fund portfolio by the fund manager, the mutual fund moves up, the ULIP moves up. Everything moves up simultaneously and consistently. So it's basically profit. The other is the government policy. So if the government is going to promote a particular industry, if the government wants to put focus on a particular industry, then that industry moves up. I mean, absolutely no qualms about it, and absolutely no doubt that anyone should have in their mind. So there has to be profit of the company and there has to be policy. Now, if you think about it, these two things are also interchangeable. If the government is putting a focus on this industry, then obviously the businesses in that industry and the companies in that industry will have more business. When they have more business, they will obviously have more profits. At least that is what is expected. So the companies that are more profitable, obviously, contribute to the growth of that sector. And then if we are invested in that sector, automatically we make a lot of money. So company profits, government policy, and the third is the general interest rate scenario, where if the interest rates are lower, then obviously, because to do business, everybody needs capital. And that capital, if available at a lower cost, create a fantastic recipe for growth in any market. So it's always, profitability, profits of a company, policy of the government, and the economic scenario, which is nothing but the interest rates, right? So let's come back to the infrastructure, which is the next big area. So this is a theme we've always, I think, for the last 3 years, in every presentation, we talk about infrastructure in one form or the other. And every time there is something or the other that the government is doing. Now, 12.2 lakh crores is the amount of money that they've allocated, saying that infrastructure, that's what we are going to spend. But well, okay, like it's not like wow or aha moment. It's not great news. It's not something new. We already knew that. The reason we knew that is if you go back a few years, there was something called the National Infrastructure Pipeline, in which it was already announced that we are going to spend more than 100 lakh crores over the next 5 to 10 years. So this is all a part of that, really. But the good news is that there is continuous focus and the sentiment remains good. Our motivation remains high to be invested in infrastructure as an area. So whether it's an infrastructure fund or whether it's an infrastructure kind of a company, whatever you are doing, this continues to be a great place to keep your money invested for many, many years. And there are, of course, different parts of infrastructure, right? There's road, there is rail. I mean, this is a very nice thing. There's a focus today happening and on the waterway. So we have an internal system of waterways, basically the rivers. And if the cargo can move across these rivers into the country, it's a huge cost saving, and it's all a part of the Gati Shakti, logistics activity, which is also a part of government's one big, very big program. So let's move further. Okay, let's move on. We'll talk about this later. There is a lot of, every time there's a budget, we always think in terms of there should be some announcement which the government should say is where we will divest, where we will, in one form or the other, open up investments for people to come in, for private participation to come in. So they do it in one form or the other. This time they're doing it in a slightly different way: highway toll collection rights, railway development, etc. But these are not directly investment opportunities, but obviously the companies that will be invested and interested in doing these kind of projects for the government will be opportunities. But we'll see how these things really work out. So in a generality of sorts, most of the times this will be a public sector company who will do that. Now, here is something I want to talk about. See, when we speak about public sector, right, there have been sessions that we've done on the public sector in the last year as well. So the government, and if you remember that very famous speech of our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, where in the parliament one day he said, Sarkari company kharid lo. And people thought that that was like an indication that, go and buy all the government companies because there's going to be a great rally in those government companies. And not only that, people also thought that after a point that rally is going to get over because it fizzled off, right? But that's not really what it is. See, when a government takes a certain activity and when the government is supporting, obviously, to protect national interests, there will be a lot of government companies also involved in trade and commerce. So most of the largest beneficiaries for this infrastructure activity will be government companies itself, along with, of course, private companies who have established credibility for operating in that space. So we must keep that in mind, which means, in other words, the government sector, which means government-owned companies, will continue to be profitable investments over the next few years as well. Okay, now let's bring the presentation back. See, every little thing that happens, and we have to actually, it's like an onion, open the skin and understand what's really happening into each one of these areas. Nothing directly is coming in front of you. Here's another thing, very indirect kind of a thing. And actually, on the day of the budget, this particular banking sector reacted very badly. But what did the government very simply say? The budget speech only said that we are going to create a high-level committee for certain reforms in the banking, so that we are prepared for the next decade. It was a vision statement. It was like a intentional and a directional statement. So what was adverse about it, and why, most of the banks actually fell on that Sunday is a mystery, because we don't know who was the person who was selling the banking sector, or who were the groups of people who were selling banking. But the fact is, a high-level committee is a good idea because we have already seen the track record of this government that when they formed committees in the past, few years back, and I very clearly mentioned this in one of our Saturday forums, on how the banking sector was completely transformed and reformed. And obviously, this banking sector and government's focus means we're talking about government-owned banking sector, which is a huge area, not really about the foreign banks and the private banks, and how they kind of changed the entire landscape in the country and how they made all these banks, which were hardly making profits, to clear out their NPAs and become very profitable. So now it's just another step in the same direction. So we should think about it positively. I don't know why people are negative on this, but this is also a great sector for getting invested into. Just see the whole landscape of investments that we are getting. We'll talk about taxation later on. Let's move forward. Okay, this is another very, very interesting thing that the government announced is in terms of energy sector. So what it said is very simply for a lot of essential components, duties will be reduced, which means they'll become cheaper because we have to do a lot more solar power, a lot more wind power and things like that. In fact, for nuclear power also, there have been certain benefits where duties have been cut. So doesn't affect us directly again, but think about it. We have to think 3 steps further. If the duty is cut, that means the company that is going to import equipment for manufacturing renewable power is going to have lesser cost, and that lesser cost translates into higher profits. And higher profits obviously mean that, with sales increasing, higher profit means rewards for us as shareholders and as fund holders. I mean, if you're mutual fund unit holders. Okay, move forward. Of course, there's been a lot of focus on tourism, but tourism, I have a little bit of I'm not ever, very, let's say, bullish about this tourism sector. I mean, it's great that there is so much of emphasis. In fact, not only that, something great happened. They also spoke about skill building. So they want to have, thousands of guides who are going to be trained and who are going to be perhaps certified also at some point of time to show the glimpses of India. India is a fantastic country, but what happens is we always sort of, lag a little bit in terms of infrastructure. I mean, the other day I was just talking to somebody and they went to visit Andamans, and they said, when we travel to Europe, even if you go to the 3-star hotel in Europe, there is a certain quality, cleanliness, and standard maintained there. But if you think about a 3-star hotel in a beautiful place like Andamans or the Lakshadweep and things like that, where I mean, think about it. The whole world pays so much of money and goes to Thailand and Krabi, and when we have our Lakshadweep and Andamans, but then look at the quality of hotels. I haven't been there, but this is what I just heard. As fresh as like day before yesterday. That our 3-star is really not worth even speaking of. So this is the problem that happens here. So no matter what we do, I think that, other than the 5 stars, we've got a long way to go. Well, some 4 stars also, but we've got a long way in terms of infrastructure. I mean, today, if you travel in India, there's also this problem that wherever you go, traffic management is pathetic. There are shops on the road. The cars have doubled in size, and it takes. I mean, if you're going on a holiday and if you're going to be stuck in a traffic jam, what do you do? There are so many examples. You can go again and again. So, which is why I think this is a great area of focus, but there are structural problems in this area. So I think tourism, I would, not want to go all in this area. Okay, this is a fabulous area. Okay, data centers. We've actually spoken so much about data centers, right? I mean, every now and then we speak about data centers. And I've always said this thing, every one of us is using data centers every other minute. The moment we take our phones in our hand, we are using a data center somewhere to access information stored at some point somewhere. That is the power of data center. What is the government saying? As a foreign company, come into India, establish a data center, work with an Indian company, and we will give you a tax holiday almost for the next 20 years, which is insane. Beauty of it is the data remains in India. So in terms of data privacy and cybersecurity, we want to do it ourselves and not depend on anyone else, which is great. Having said that, if all the data is also here, at least the risk of data pilferage or data getting leaked and stolen, we hope that that is under control. But more than anything else, data center coming in India means there's a huge amount for real estate companies, for technology companies, hardware companies, and mind you, data centers requires a lot of support infrastructure. and two essential things being power and cooling. So, because you see, these servers generate a lot of heat, right? I mean, even if you sort of just touch your, even if you have a laptop, for example, and you run your laptop for say maybe an hour or two, and if you touch the back of the laptop, you will see that it's become warm. What that means is it's generating heat. Any electronic device, when you use it, generates heat. Our air conditioners are a perfect example. The moment you pass by the outdoor unit of an air conditioning unit, you will feel the warmth and the heat. So imagine data centers, thousands and thousands of these servers running continuously and cranking up data for us in our phones and in our PCs or wherever we are accessing the data. The heat generation is enormous. So what data first needs to run, it needs uninterrupted power, and preferably it has to be renewable power. We cannot go to the old coal-fired power, and we cannot go to thermal power and all that. We have to be into renewable. So that is an industry that benefits. And the second industry that benefits is cooling, because with the heat generation, the entire environment, that factory, that warehouse, that data farm, everything has to be cooled down. Now, how do you cool down things if you don't have air conditioning? So think about it, the number of industries that this data center is going to affect. And now for next 20 years, if they're going to not have tax to pay, it's like a mind-blowing opportunity. So it's actually the opportunity of our lifetimes. It is such a huge opportunity, and something that we cannot, under any circumstances, underplay on this particular area. So data centers, I think that was a fantastic, sort of announcement. Other than that, yeah, this was another interesting announcement that came in, which said that we want to make India as the global biopharma hub. Of course, India already, as we know, is the pharmaceutical laboratory of the world. And because we are like the pharmaceutical laboratory, or the manufacturer, or the large scale manufacturer, we have the capacity also. And if we support our pharmaceutical companies in this particular endeavor of becoming a global hub, then I think we have a long way to go. And pharmaceutical, although we sometimes say is like a recession-proof industry, because medicines are going to be needed all the time. And if not medicines, then the whole new segment of wellness that has emerged, which means that whole business of supplements. But then who's going to manage and who's going to manufacture supplements? It's obviously these pharmaceutical companies. So I think this is also an industry, or this is also a sector where we can always have a little bit of our maybe 5%, 8% of our allocation. You can change it. If you have some favorites in terms of companies, you can buy those. But otherwise, there's lots of pharmaceutical investment options that are there in our country, and we should always be a part of it. And for some of you who have portfolios with us, you already know that you have pharma. Other than that, medical tourism, great announcement again, and not again from the Yuva Shakti point of view. They now want to train so many people, so that's great. I mean, whenever there is anything like a proactive job creation or something like that happens, skill building that happens, I think this is a very long-term kind of a strategy, because it doesn't really give you results in 1 year or 2 years, but it's like the whole generation which is being uplifted. And this is also a great way to have a significant percentage of our population come above the poverty line. I mean, right from there to the higher level. And all these people come in the mainstream, they will earn better. And once they earn, means they will also spend. Consumer, consumption will also move up. Consumer durables also go up. So it's always great to educate. And the education industry itself will also benefit as a result of this. So that's also there in front of you. Let's move. See, I mean, these are things that, we don't really think about uh, in the direct sense. We look at it, we read it, and then we say, okay, chalo, kuch khas nahi mila. Because most of the times, what we are really wanting to do from any budget statement, we just want a very simple thing to happen. That, did I save money? Did I save tax? Did I make a little bit of a benefit here? Did I do something or the other by which, I have an immediate benefit? Because we are so, addicted, and thanks to this device at our hand, we are so addicted to this instant gratification that anything that we want or anything that we do, we want instant result for that. So if the budget announced that, okay, from tomorrow onwards, you're going to save, 50,000 rupees of tax, so then there's a party, there's a celebration. If they say, as corporate India, you're going to save 2% of tax, we would have seen the markets fly off by another 3%. These kind of things. But these are very shallow and very flimsy sort of things. I mean, these kind of directional statements that come in are great. Implementation and challenges and all these kind of questions will always remain in India till the time we all have a mindset of quality. And you know what I mean by this is I spoke about this a while ago when I was talking tourism and the example of those three-star hotels. For any one of you who's even traveled, look at Europe. I mean, whatever be the financial situation there, but you go into not Europe, you're not in the main city of Europe, but you go into a remote city that, let's say, nobody goes to. So, which means I'm saying it's like saying in India, you know, if I had to give an example, a very similar sort of an example, let's say you are in Mumbai, okay, and you go to Sangli, for example. It's not a Satara Sangli. It's not like a real touristy destination. You will want to come to a Mumbai, you will want to go to a Delhi, Bangalore. I mean, these are places that you want to, as a tourist, these are places you'll go to, New Delhi, etc. But would you go to Sangli or Satara? Now, I'm giving you that kind of example. You go to a similar place, which is not really a very touristic zone, and you go and live in a hotel there, a three-star hotel also. And then you compare that quality with the quality that you get of a three-star in a large city like a Mumbai or a Delhi also, and you will understand the cleanliness and the hygiene and all of that, what I'm talking about. So it's a mindset. Till the time we don't have this mindset in India of quality, I think we're going to have challenges. But other than that, there are so many opportunities that this kind of a budget statement tells us, and it's up to us how we interpret it. Bring it back. Let's sort of move forward and see what else was in store. Of course, there are some bad news also. We are not actually bad news. There's something interesting. Let's move forward. Let's move. I mean, this is again Ayurveda. Uh, let's move forward. Okay, just hold on to this. Let me just see. Okay, that's all right. This is very economic. I mean, this is not from an opportunity point of view, but there's a lot of benefits that are coming into the MSME sector. But that's okay. Um, let's move forward. Legacy, move forward and forward, please. Okay, now this is something very, very okay. This is what the negative I was talking about, right? Now there are two. Actually, it's not really a negative. The sovereign gold bond, whatever has happened to that, is very negative and very, very much in bad taste. Absolutely, disastrous. The kind of announcement that there was that came through, and obviously it didn't come in the budget speech, but it came in the fine print later in the document that we got later on. And the other thing is about this foreign asset. But let's speak about this. Gold bonds for a moment, okay? Um, so, few years back, the government came with a very, very interesting proposition for all of us, saying that, look, I mean, as Indians, traditionally we want to, buy gold. And we want to buy gold consistently. Every year we want to buy gold. I mean, for example, on Akshaya Tritiya, on Diwali, these are events which are obviously very auspicious. Gudi Padwa, for example. These are days where we want to actually add a little bit of gold and silver into our households, correct? So the government said, okay, as Indians, we are, because everybody wants to buy gold, and every year the government has to import a lot of gold from outside. And what happens as a result of that, when you import something, you can't exactly spend rupees and import, you have to spend dollars. And when you spend dollars, means the government's reserve of dollars kind of shrinks to the extent of this gold, then especially gold, not so much silver, but gold and silver that we are importing, and which you and me as consumers are buying. So the government thought, let me come out with a very clever proposition. Let me tell the people, look, you want to buy gold? Great, you buy it. But let me give you the option of buying gold in an electronic format. Okay. So they introduced what is known as SGB, sovereign gold bond. Okay. And the reason I'm saying this is so everybody who is not even aware of this can have the complete story in front of them. Okay. And perhaps my team can also, disconnect this video and just put a separate video on sovereign gold bonds and the outcome of this budget on that. So what happens is the government says instead of you going to the market and buying gold physically, which ultimately is a liability on the country because the country has to import that gold for you. We don't really manufacture so much, and we have to spend our dollars to do that. So instead of that, you buy the gold in rupees and through a bond program which comes with sovereign guarantee. Means you spend your 1 lakh or 10,000 or whatever you want to spend, you buy a bond. Okay, this bond will sit nice and pretty into your demat account. Okay, so far so good. You buy the gold, say for 1 lakh rupees. You have a bond equal to that, and you can buy in denomination of 1 gram of gold based on the price. And so you made your investment. Very nice. The government says, even I'll make it even sweeter for you. I have to give you incentive, right? We have to give you some motivation to buy. Otherwise, why will you buy? I mean, you would rather feel safe with your gold sitting in your own safe deposit locker. So the government says, listen, you not only will be able to enjoy the price appreciation, because today if you bought gold for say 1 lakh rupees, after 8 years or 5 years, whenever either you decide to exit the bond or when the bond matures, I will give you equal of the gold rate. So which means gold wise, whether you had physical or whether you had digital, you're going to have the same capital gain or appreciation in terms of gold price. Fine. I will make it even sweeter, the government said. We will give you 2.5% interest. Great. Now, what has happened is, while the government did this scheme, they had subscription to the scheme in tonnage, in tons of gold. Obviously, all of us Indians, we bought that. But what the government made a very big mistake is they did not have real physical gold backing it, because they said, and they must have thought in their wisdom, that gold hai, kitna price upar jayega. Gold is supposed to be an inflation hedge. Maybe it will go up about 2%, 3% each year. But in the meanwhile, we are saving so much of foreign exchange, and we are having to pay only 2.5%. So we are paying less than what the saving bank pays, and we are having all this money from all our citizens to finance whatever we want in terms of whether it's infrastructure or municipal projects, to whatever needs to be done. Now, this is very bad risk management, right? I mean, they should have had some gold behind. And you know what has happened to the price of gold, right, in the last 2 years, 3 years. Now the government doesn't have the real gold to back it up. They should have done some risk management or some hedging. They don't have it. So they have to buy gold from the market at the current rate, or they don't really have to buy it, but whatever is the current rate, they have to pay you, which is a massive loss to the government. So what money they thought that they are raising from you and me at 2.5% is actually costing the government 18, 20, maybe 22%, and it will keep rising as the gold price keeps rising. So the government, has a very big problem on their hands because of this. So now what happens is they said, and very important feature of the sovereign gold bond. They said, you buy the bond today, but after 2 years, if you want to exit, no problem. You just go onto the market and sell it on the stock exchange, and you will have your exit, and you will not be liable to pay any capital gains. Now, this is where the problem is, because the gold price has gone up. Now, the government doesn't know what to do, so the government wants to recover as much money as it can. And now, what the government is saying is that if you are only the original holder of the bond and only if you held it till maturity, I will give you capital gain exemption. Otherwise, if you bought a bond from the stock market and if you sell it before maturity, whatever capital gains, you have to pay capital gain tax. So that I thought was really bad taste. I mean, once you've given a commitment saying that there's going to be no tax, and once you give the facility saying that you can buy and sell on the market and there is no capital gains to that, it's not very nice. Okay, what has happened? So if you have sovereign gold bonds and if you bought it through the market, they're going to be taxable now. So that's one bad part. And other one, the other one is not such a bad one. I mean, but very, very pertinent from our point of view. Now, listen to this extremely carefully. Okay, what they have spoken is about foreign asset disclosure. Details you can get into a discussion with your chartered accountant or whoever's filing your tax returns, but it's very important that you consult whoever you are working with respect to your tax. What they have said is that every single asset that you have outside of India has to be declared. And they are saying that a lot of PAN card holders, by the way, we are in a world where data is freely exchanged. India has a lot of credibility now in the world, and data is freely being exchanged between governments. So if you think that you have something in UK or Australia or even Azerbaijan or Russia or Georgia or wherever, and you think the government is not going to find out, then please don't be under that impression that they will not find out. They will find out. Okay, and then if you have not declared, then it's going to become a very, very big violation. Now, they already know this thing. They already are saying that a lot of PAN holders have a lot of assets which they have figured and verified, but we are not filing. Now, see, most of us and most of the times people are not deliberately doing that. It just happens inadvertently because you don't really think it was important. Now, they have very clearly specified if you were a student, you went abroad to study, and at that point of time you had a bank account, then you have to supposed to declare it. Even if that bank account may be defunct, dormant, not even operational. But the fact that you have a bank account, even if that has zero balance for the last 15 years, but it has to be declared. So it's a little bit of hard work. It's a little bit of us having to dig out some of the old records and put it up. Of course, if you have a property or if you have an investment or a portfolio or whatever, that has to be declared. And if you're thinking that cannot be declared, that's a very big offense, but or not offense, violation. But whatever else we have, I mean, if our children go or if you yourself went to study 20, 30, 40 years ago, and if you had a bank account somewhere, how would you be doing your operations? Obviously, you needed a bank account, right? You were not paying your tuition fees and all the fees in cash. I mean, in hard cash, right? So that's the other thing that you need to be aware of. This is something that's very important. So they have given you this voluntary disclosure facility. Please use this facility. Please speak to your tax consultant and just make sure that you are fully compliant in this area, because otherwise the implication can be very, very severe. As much as, I mean, on one side there's 60% tax and on the other side there is penalty, and not to mention there's a violation of the Black Money and the Money Laundering Act and all that. Very, very serious matter. But you have got an opportunity. Please declare everything. So that's all that there is in terms of. So these are the two major negatives which are basically found. Of course, in terms of taxation, we just mentioned a small thing like that buyback. So if you're basically having a buyback of shares, then that's not going to be taxed the way it was taxed as dividend. That buyback is now going to become um, as capital gains for most of us. Okay, unless you're promoters. We already spoke about the sovereign gold bonds, and we spoke about this. That this is all about implementation now. So, in summary, let's move forward. There's lots of interesting slides, but how much can we speak, right? We have limited time. Let's move forward. So yeah, just to kind of summarize, what immediate action you need to take is your foreign asset disclosure. Just reassess your strategy in sovereign gold bonds if you hold on to it, whether you want to hold on, whether you don't want to hold on, if you bought from the market, not bought from the market, etc. And of course, there's all that activity and action that you can do with a lot of sectors. See, I personally think there's a lot of opportunity that happens in sectors. Just come back to the previous one. So there's a lot of opportunity that can happen in sectors, because Indian market now is not really only about the blue chips or not only about the mid caps or the small caps. A lot of times, a lot of investors ignore this power of a sector, and it's not a bad idea to maybe invest 5% in say a pharma sector, an auto sector, infrastructure, banking. There are so many different pockets which are customized and are ready made for us. And these are investments that one should consider, to even an extent that maybe you want to tone down the percentage of blue chips that you want to have in your portfolio, or the mid caps, the small caps. You tone them down and actually make space for a pharma sector, auto sector, infrastructure. Of course, speak to your consultants. If you're with us, of course, we are very happy to help you. But speak about all this, discuss about all this, but make a huge amount of area and funds available to invest in new sectors, because these sectors are a very, very profitable strategy. And that is what we've observed for the last few years. And I think for the next decade, this is what's going to really play out in a very, very beautiful and powerful manner.